about herbaceous grafting, a method of propagating plants.
Well, what they do is they graft tomatoes onto potatoes.
Funding for Garden Line is provided in part by your membership in the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting. And by Swiftel Communications.
Hello and welcome to Garden Line. I'm Stephen Monk. Tonight on our show, we return to the greenhouse with Extension horticulturist Rhoda Burrows, where Rhoda will discuss the tips for transplanting seedlings. And as always, our panel of lawn and garden experts will answer your questions, so get ready to call in. Our panelists are here with the most up-to-date information about gardening, lawn care, insects, trees, and a host of other lawn and garden-related concerns. Joining me in the studio to answer your questions tonight is John Kiekefer, Brookings County Extension Educator, John Ball, Extension Forestry Specialist, Daryl Denicky, Extension Integrated Pest Management, and Casey Jensen, SDSU Wildlife and Fisheries Sciences. You can start calling in. The phone number for you to call with your lawn and garden questions is 1-866-595-SDSU. Again, that is 1-866-595-7378. Helping to answer the phones tonight are the folks from Minnehaha Master Gardeners. And remember, when you call in with your questions, please provide your phone volunteers with as much information as possible about your garden problem. Be ready to provide a description of the problem, when the problem first appeared, whether it's affecting any other surrounding plants, and moisture and or soil conditions that exist around the problem. First off, we're going to go around the table to hear from our panel on what is currently happening, starting with you, John Kiekefer, because once again we have two Johns here tonight. So,
okay, I brought in some images of bugs that aren't really garden pests. You may find a few of them in your gardens, and we've got large numbers of them flying right now. I've had a number of calls on these. People sometimes wonder if they're seeing a whole swarm of mosquitoes flying around, and instead of being mosquitoes, these are midges. I've got, like I said, a couple pictures of them here. This is a male of one of the species that's commonly flying right now. They do look a lot like a mosquito. They don't have the long mouth parts like a mosquito does. And these things are relatively harmless. To an average homeowner, they don't do anything more than maybe make a pile of little dead midges under a light somewhere. Otherwise, the larvae live in water. They're known as bloodworms, and they've got a true red blood, something like mammals would have in them. And so if you find these little things at the bottom of a lake, they look like a little worm with blood inside of them. But that blood is their own. It didn't come from anything else. The adults fly around, mate, and lay eggs and die. They aren't going to cause any problems in a garden or in a home, but they do cause some alarm in some people who think they're seeing a lot of mosquitoes hanging around on the side of a building, or sometimes flying in the air around their homes. Just for comparison, here is a mosquito. You can see it's got the long mouth parts. This one is stuck into human skin, and it's drawing up a blood meal. Mosquitoes are different. I don't want to confuse people on this. One is not the same as the other here, but they do look a little bit superficially the same, and so we have some people who are concerned about them.
okay. Size-wise, they're about the same size? Or is the midge a little bigger? Or just...
Typically, the midges that we're seeing at this time of year are going to be a little bit bigger than the mosquitoes that we're seeing. Midges range in size from tiny little things that are far smaller than any mosquito to much larger insects than mosquitoes. Like I say, they don't have those long mouth parts like a mosquito does, and so when they're resting on a building, they tend to have all four legs down on a building or on grass or other vegetation, and you won't see those mouth parts protruding in front of them.
Okay. Thanks, John. John Ball, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, I have a sample that you brought in tonight. Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
And this is something I see every year. I get calls at this time of year. And people go out and look at their plum tree, or most often their chokecherry tree, and they'll find this black growth on it. And this black growth, which looks rather horrible, is known by numerous names. Dead man's finger is a good example of it. The other one's monkey poop on a stick, which I guess fits as well. So pick your own name. But, you know, they want to know, well, how do you control this? You don't. If you went out and pruned every one of these growths on it, and this is a fungus, by the way, next year you'll find just as many. And the reason for that, the first year infection, you can't really see. It's just a slight swollen area of the stem. The second year, which is now, you're going to get this large blackened growth here. And so really the best way to manage this is kill the tree. And the reason for that is that once a tree becomes infected, it seems to always become infected. You'll prune things off every year, and most people have a busier life than that. Interesting enough, there's a lot of resistance to this disease within the population. So you can literally have two chokecherries growing right one into the other. One's covered with it and the other one is not. And so that's why I say really the best means of managing it is pruning it. If you get on the internet, a dangerous thing to do, you will find all sorts of recommendations. Most commonly applying lime sulfur in the spring, but the timing is critical, like to the minute. And most people aren't going to find that minute. So really this is actually best managed just by killing the tree and moving on.
Okay. So regardless of how much of that shows up on the tree, even if it's just a few spots, you know, just perhaps?
Yeah, I would. Now again, if it's your favorite tree and it was planted by Aunt Margaret or something like that, it left you a lot of money, sure. Take the branches off, but the next year you'll find a few more and you'll take those off. The next year you'll find a few more and you'll take those off. And eventually decide to take the tree. But
now if you have a tree that is susceptible to this, that's in a shelter belt planting, just
then
let it go.
Yeah, why worry about it?
Yeah.
I mean, this will block more wind, I guess.
Okay.
You know, so leave it. But yeah, you're not going to cure it, I guess, is the point. And as long as you don't mind looking at it, you know, leave it. It isn't going to hurt you, and it's not going to spread to your kids.
All right. It's always an attention getter.
Oh, that it is.
Yeah,
that it is.
Shows up in
put it in an arrangement.
So, all right. Thanks, John. Daryl, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about a new invasive that we're seeing in the state. It's garlic mustard, and we'll have a video coming up here showing a picture of it here directly. Garlic mustard really was introduced from Europe in the late 1800s, brought over for medicinal purposes, like a lot of things that were brought over and have gone invasive on us here in North America. But garlic mustard in that mustard family, so we're seeing that right now. Coming up, the plant that's on the that you're looking at in the video or the picture right now is a mature part of the plant. It is a biennial, so this is the last part of the life cycle of that plant. So it's going to get ready to produce seed. So if you're doing a control and you want to make sure you keep that thing from spreading, controlling and keeping it from producing seed at this stage is going to be vital. Next picture will show a little bit as far as some identification features of it. If you look at that leaf, a very distinctive tooth margin on that around that leaf, distinctive blue flower. Why we're concerned about that particular plant, Minnesota has got a terrible problem with it over there, and they're really combating that particular plant. But what we're really concerned, it likes forested areas, so it does invade some of the areas in and around parks and those type of things, and it takes out our native vegetation. So what we need to do then is kind of really watch those areas. In South Dakota, we just started noticing it here a few years ago. 3 counties basically right now, and this shows that once it really gets away, this is how invasive that thing will be, and once it starts having some effect on our native plantings or in and around those trees and those forested areas. But if we go ahead and take a look at it there and watching these areas, like I said, the 3 counties, Minnehaha County, it's in Spearfish, so we do have it on the other side of the river, and last week we just confirmed it in Yankton County. Okay.
So as far as the time of year to work on this?
You want to work on this when we get that new growth. So while we have that growth coming now, we'll have that first year growth coming up. If we're going to use a herbicide treatment in and around trees, we got to be very careful and use one that'll work there. A lot of things work from Roundup to 2,4-D. We just got to be really careful about the site.
Okay. So if you would mow it mechanically now to keep it from going to seed, and you get into a fall treatment spray for broadleafs, would that work for?
If you've got your new growth coming in the fall, you can pick it up then. We've got trials going where we're doing that. The mowing setup, we're treating it just like a biennial does work.
Okay, good. Thank you, Darryl.
But those areas are a little tough to get into.
Do goats like it?
I haven't noticed that they have.
Okay. So, thank you. Casey, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, I don't have any pretty pictures, but this is a great time of the year to get out. The birding right now is spectacular. We had our annual bird walk at the Oak Lake Field Station last Saturday. We had 17 different species of warblers alone, and 76 species total in the morning, so it was a wonderful day. Right now the hummingbirds are showing up, and so it's time to get your hummingbird feeders out if you haven't got them out already. Cleaned up just a simple sugar mixture of 1 part sugar to 4 parts water, and you'll be set to go. So it's a great time to have something in your garden, put things in your garden for birds, and you'll have a good summer with them.
Okay. The purple martins back yet?
They are.
Oh, they are?
Yes, they showed up in early to mid-April, actually.
All right, good. Thank you, Casey.
Yep.
So, now, before we get to our questions, we will hear from Dennis Toddy, Extension State Climatologist, as he talks about the temperature outlook for the next 8 to 14 days. Dennis asks the question, will we have enough heat to take advantage of this recent rain?
This is State Climatologist Dennis Toddy with this week's Garden Line Climate Update. Plenty of rain has fallen across much of the state in the last week to 10 days, leading to some flooding issues across the western part of the state. The additional moisture, though, has made some even slightly dry areas wet again. Other areas of the east obviously still have ample moisture and flooding issues. But now, will we have enough heat to take advantage of that moisture? Looking at the graphic you see here, we seem to be heading that way. Average temperatures at this time of year are in the low to mid-70s for highs, and average lows are in the upper 40s to low 50s in the southeast. The reddish-brown area over the southeastern part of the state indicates that the temperature outlook for the next 14 days now shows warmer than average temperatures are most likely in that part of the state, and the white shows near average temperatures across the west. Probably most critical right now is that this reduces the likelihood of additional freezing or frost conditions. We are past the date of most of the climatologically likely frost-free period, except for some of the frost-prone areas across the west. Conditions, therefore, should be conducive to planting most anything, other than maybe some plants that don't react well to excessively wet conditions we're seeing in certain areas. Current temperature maps and links to outlooks are available at our website, climate.sdstate.edu.
All right. Well, thank you, Dennis, for that information. So, well, you ready for questions?
You bet.
All right. This one comes from Aberdeen. And John Ball. John Ball. They planted a Kiefer pear tree last week. This tree needs a mate. How far away does the second tree need to be for cross-pollination or to get pollination?
I feel like a matchmaker now. We'll see if we can find a compatible tree for yours. Well, and they're absolutely correct. With pears, you do need 2. And they need to be 2 different cultivars. So they can't just go out and buy the same pear again. What I would probably recommend is maybe buy 2 more. Luscious and a Gourmet. Those are 2 pears released from South Dakota. The reason I say both those is those tend to be pollen sterile. They don't produce pollen, they would accept it. So you'll need to have, that'll serve actually as a pollinator. The other, well, where are they from, I should ask?
Aberdeen.
Aberdeen?
Yep.
Ooh, yeah. Summer crisp is kind of pushing it. It's going to be a little cold for that. And even the pear they're selecting there, they may find its mate will be lonely in a few years.
Okay.
It may or may not make it. The other one they might try is Golden Spice, if they can find it. That is one hardy pear. And the fruit's actually edible. So that's probably what I recommend. And to answer the other part of the question, within 50 feet of one another is the ideal for pollination.
Okay, 50 feet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. Daryl, using a dandelion digger, what % of the root should be removed to kill the dandelion?
Well, you want to try to get as much of that root as possible. The best thing to look at on that, on a plant, the bulky part of that root will probably make up about that first 2/3. So try to get at least that much of the root.
Okay. Probably at least 3 inches down?
Yeah, you'll be a good
Somewhere
3
there?
inches
Okay.
down. Yeah.
That's from Mulbridge. I don't know if they have deeper roots there or not. So, okay, back to you, John Ball. This comes from, I'm going to guess Tabor here, the way it looks, the way it's written. Amber maple dropping sticky substance from the aphids. Is there any substance type treatment for this? The tree is 40 to 50 feet tall, too tall for them to spray.
It's not an amber maple.
Yeah.
Not for that tall. That would only be a few feet. 10, 15 feet. But right now, yes, we're getting a fairly good aphid population out there. I've noticed that on a number of trees. I don't know if the other John has, but and they do produce a substance called honeydew, which is a very sticky substance, which when it gets on your decks and that will leave it very sticky. It's really not harming the plant. It's more or less a nuisance for them. And they're looking at how to get rid of the sticky material.
Yeah, is there any
soap and water?
Systemic?
Well, if they want to kill the aphid,
yeah.
then there are systemics. But the problem with the systemics is they take 30 to 60 days sometimes before they're taken up sufficiently to kill. So while it might be worth using a systemic, applying around the base of the tree, do not expect it to be instant control. And at that height, frankly, that's probably about the only thing they're going to be able to use to get it. But I would remind them, if this is an annual problem, really the systemic should be put down in the fall.
Okay.
And it'll be taken up for the
Kind
spring.
of a preventive measure for next year.
That's correct. It'd be preventative.
Fall meaning?
October is a nice time to go out and do that.
Okay.
Late September.
I do believe, as I read this here, that elm, would that make sense?
Elm would make a lot
and
of
maple?
sense. Yeah. Okay. We have a real problem with elms as well.
Okay. And that's where the black mildew-looking substance comes, is from the sugar?
Correct.
Growing on comes off there? Okay. Crimson maple from Sioux Falls. They have lived there for 14 years. The trees were there when they moved in. The last 2 years, the leaves have lost their crimson color. Usually they were crimson all year. Now they're leafing out green and staying green. Occasionally there is a crimson leaf here and there, but otherwise the tree is mainly green.
Yeah.
Any reason for that?
Yeah, there is, in fact. On some of the Norway maple cultivars, and that's what it is, the cultivar, the one you wanted, was actually an unstable mutation. And every now and then a tree will revert. We see that with the variegated Norway maples. Quite often you can see one that's half and half. Part of the canopy is variegated, part of it is not. And eventually the whole thing goes green because that'll take over. Now and then you'll see that on the red leaf ones too. And if they had been watching it, they might have noticed that certain branches were now green and now they're staying green. What that means is, yeah, they're going to be left with a green tree and it never reverts back again. So if they're happy with it, leave it the way it is, but there's nothing they can do to change it. Yeah.
And nothing they can do to help minimize that ahead of time? That's just part of the...
That's genetics.
Okay.
Yeah. Hit it with radiation, I guess. Maybe you can make it to mutate again. I don't know, but other than going out there and dimming the lights in the neighborhood with the radiation.
Crocuses around it?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Pine Ridge, Daryl. And you have any idea what the forecast for grasshoppers is going to be this year in that area?
Well, in that area, that's an easy one. You're going to have grasshoppers. And even with the weather conditions we've had now, we're still going to have some pretty substantial numbers in a lot of areas West River. The egg counts from last fall were very high. And so unless we have a real continuation of this cool, wet type of conditions, it's naturally going to take care of some of them. We've still got enough eggs out there that there's still going to be high populations going on.
Well, and what's wet for West River isn't too wet for grasshoppers.
Yeah.
So that's the other consideration.
Good point, yeah.
To bring in.
Anything you suggest? They don't really say if it's going to be, well, let's assume it's a horticulture-related situation. Flowers, garden, anything you recommend?
Repeated applications of insecticide is about the only way to try to keep them out of there. It's not like a field setting where you can try to control them around the edges and keep them out of the center. When you're dealing with smaller garden like that, you're left with just that very limited area, and they keep moving in as fast as you get them out of there.
And they eat everything. Last year I was getting samples of pine trees defoliated by them, and people couldn't believe it. But
The needles.
The needles.
Eating the needles.
Yeah,
Right.
they'll defoliate a pine even.
Okay. They did take some paint off one of my boards one year.
Yeah,
I
you
noticed
hear
that.
the stories about fence posts and,
Yep.
and sightings of houses, and that's
Yeah.
they're not that picky after when they're
full head
hungry.
of hair last, until I walked through one last year.
Yeah. Okay.
Next question.
Yeah, next question. They're north of Wall, asparagus. And John, we're going to give this to you. Fourth year that they've had asparagus. Didn't come up at all this year. Didn't let it go to seed last year. Has been doing fine all the previous years. Any thoughts on why it maybe all of a sudden decided not to come up?
They said last year, well, it's 4 years old now.
Fourth year.
Yeah.
Didn't come up at all this year.
Right, but last year
They did let it go to seed last year. Yep. So it was up growing, and they let it go to the ferns and the seed and everything.
Well, and which they should have.
Yep.
It's really hard to say on that. I mean, one of the bigger problems we see is people getting anxious and starting to harvest asparagus too soon. Normally we like to let it go at least 2 years, preferably 3 years before you really start harvesting it. So you end up developing an adequate root system that it can stand that. It sounds like they've done that if they let it go to seed at year 3. But I guess the other question I have is just how much harvesting did they do in year 3? They may have reduced its carbohydrate storage. The only other thing is, because I have seen it, is that asparagus is not really fond of heavy soils. I used to work for the ag department in Michigan, and we grow a lot of asparagus there, and that's on that sandy soil. You get a heavy soil and you get a wet soil. It doesn't do very well, and sometimes it won't come back. So I'm just guessing right now, but I can't think of a disease that would have killed it that way.
Okay. Or otherwise, maybe get a little more time. If it does not come back, then start over probably.
Yeah, start over, and maybe check the site before you start over again. Unless again what they were doing was continually harvesting it too soon. But otherwise, make sure the soil is well drained, little porous. Raised beds are great, and then just let her sit for a couple of years before you start harvesting.
Okay, very good. John Geekafer, how do you control slugs, snails on hostas later in the summer?
Yeah, we get this question a lot, and this is kind of a challenge, honestly. It's not the easiest thing to do. There are several types of baits available on the market, and they are truly a bait product. 2 active ingredients that are out there commonly, either one is effective. You do need to watch out for other pets, especially with the one type that's out there, and dogs in particular can pick up some of those baits. Those things are going to need a repeated application like some of these other things. You're not going to be able to put them down once and be done with it. You're going to have to keep going after it. And I think really what makes more sense in some of these cases is to try to modify that area around hostas. And I know in this case it's hard because the same conditions that hostas like, slugs like, or snails, both they like those cool, shady, moist areas. And so it's going to be hard to modify that sort of habitat. But even getting things like wood chips and rocks away from them so you take away those hiding places is important.
Okay. Chamberlain, bird question here for you, Casey. Last year they saw a bird in the garden. He could not identify it with the Audubon book. About the size of a robin or blackbird, charcoal black but not shiny black. 2 distinctive markings, a triangle-shaped red marking on the breast, and on the side by the wing a white stripe and dot, like a one-eyed smiling face. Do you know what it might have been?
Well, I'm thinking that he had a rose-breasted grosbeak. They're very common in central and eastern South Dakota. And they have the triangular shaped kind of a rosy red spot on their breast and white spot on their wing, so that in a black, otherwise kind of a charcoal black color. So that'd be my guess, was a rose-breasted grosbeak. So look in your book at that one.
Good bird to have?
Great bird to have. They like to come to feeders. They sing beautifully. In fact, I tell my students they sound like robins on steroids. They kind of the same song except faster, like you played it at a different speed on your record player. Yeah.
I thought by great he meant delicious. You said great, I go, wow.
You want to go over that name one more time?
Rose-breasted grosbeak.
Okay.
They have a big fat bill that's made for cracking seeds.
Okay.
Yep.
See if they can find that.
Yep.
All right. This comes to us from Brookings John, experienced gardener, and they have hollyhock seeds. Wants to know how to plant them, where to plant them, how deep, and their care. Sun or shade, in parentheses. So they want all aspects of planting hollyhock seeds.
You know what? Those are easy. That's the nice thing. South location's best. They're not ideal for the north side. But other than just making sure that you've cleaned the soil, you don't have a lot of competition for it, just cover the seed. That's it. Keep it moist. They'll grow literally like a weed. In fact, it's quite often they become a biennial weed. So it's an easy plant. If they can't grow that, give up on gardening, I guess, is my philosophy. So, but yeah, moist soils and south locations best.
Usually that's the type of plant that after a couple years we get the question on how to thin them out.
Yeah, how do you get rid of it? Yeah.
All right. So Daryl from the Black Hills spruce. However, thistles keep growing up right beside the tree. What can they use to kill it that won't hurt the tree? And maybe John and Daryl can work on this.
I want to hear this answer.
Yeah. Well, I'd like a little more information, like what the location is that in a lawn setting. Is it in a like a belt area or something like that?
Unfortunately, I do not have that information. So,
if it's in a tree belt type of situation and it's that close, it's still real sticky to kind of go through and try to get something like that. If glyphosate would be the only thing I'd want to try under there, I'm going to be very, very careful. I'd want to make sure it's a fairly mature tree. If it's in a lawn, then I would use mechanical means of it as much as you can. Maybe do some disturbance of the soil around to kind of to get it either pulled up or tilled up around it to some degree. But you're going to have some seed that's still going to come up. So I don't know, would you want to do any type of a mulch or anything around there?
Mulch would be good, but looking at it, if it was a windbreak situation, you're right. I mean, that's the difference. There are herbicides out on the market, but unfortunately, if you read most of their labels, they're going to say stay away from some evergreens, spruce particularly.
And one herbicide I want to really caution on that would be milestone. You'll hear a lot of people talking about milestone right now. Fantastic thistle herbicide, but you're going to have some damage, particularly on evergreen species.
Yeah, and specifically on spruce. And so it's a good product, and we know a lot of people say, well, I'm going to use that rather than Tordon. Yeah. And of course, Tordon, you even shake the can, the spruce will die. But yeah, this is, you say, well, I use that on my maples or that, did fine, but yeah, not on spruce. Spruce, you're getting back to a little glyphosate, carefully applied, or mechanical.
And if you use a mulch, I imagine you'd want a good quality weed barrier first under that, depending on they don't say what kind of thistle, whether it's a...
Actually, we've gotten away from that.
Okay.
And the reason for that is, you get 2 to 3 inches of mulch on mulch, you'll find weeds starting on top of the mulch. And now you got that barrier in your way. Quite honestly, just put down a good mulch and do a little weeding from now and then. You're going to find you don't get any more. And now you don't have to worry about the fabric.
Okay. While we're on that topic, the two of you again, this is from Lyman County. Can I spray Trimec or other herbicides under plum trees? He has a problem with Canadian thistles. If not Trimec, are there other chemicals that may be better?
Again, depending on what the location of those trees are. Plum trees are going to, if you go with a glyphosate treatment in a tree belt type of situation, there's going to be foliage down closer to the ground on that, so I'd be real leery there. Again, if it's along a yard setting or something like that, I guess I would have to look at mechanical or some other means. Keeping them mowed off if it's an area that you can mow. I'd try to go that route rather than a herbicide treatment.
Yeah, I would agree. And he didn't say anything about the plums in particular, but if it's a food crop too, now we're adding more issues to it too. Really. Plums do best with a minimal amount of competition. We used to grow them clean culture. I mean, just black dirt. Here, you do need a little mulch in the wintertime, just keep the soils from freezing hard. I'd probably put a mulch down and mechanical and leave it at that, because plums are real sensitive. I mean, you could have it look good one day, and the next day they apply something, the third day it's dead. So a lot of caution with those.
All right. Tough weed to have right next to those plants.
Particularly where they mentioned a Trimec product too. That's a growth regulator product, and this type of a tree or shrub, I would not want to use that right close.
Okay. Well, we're going to take a little break here, and we're going to go to a segment with Rhoda Burrows. So, over the past 2 weeks, Gardenline traveled to a greenhouse to learn which annuals work best in sunny and shady locations. This week, Gardenline goes back to a greenhouse where Rhoda Burrows, Extension horticulturist, demonstrates the proper transplanting methods for use of those seedlings.
Good evening. We're back at the SDSU horticulture greenhouses again. And again, you can see the McCrory Gardens bedding plants in the background. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about transplanting. We talked last week about how to select transplants. And this week I'd like to show you a couple of tips that you can use for plants that have sort of gotten out of hand. Normally with our transplants, when we transplant, we want to just take it, put it into the same soil line it was before, right there. But this time we're going to go do something a little bit different with tomatoes. First of all, I'll back up and talk a little bit about artificial media. If you're using a containerized media with peat in, sometimes the peat will be very dry. You open it up and you get this dust of peat dust. If your peat is like that, you want to either wear a dust mask or just open up the bag a little bit and pour in water and work it in first, because it's really not good for you to breathe that dust. So first thing I'm going to do is work water in. And one of the things you need to do is kind of work that in with your hand and make sure that it gets worked in evenly, because you'll have pockets of dry peat otherwise that just may not take up the water very well. So you want to make sure that that's good and worked in. With tomatoes, we have this little tip. Tomatoes have little root initials all along the stem. So we can actually take a tomato that's long and skinny like this, and we can lay it in sideways or straight down and cover up that stem, and roots will form all the way along wherever it's covered up. So that's a good way to handle those tomatoes that just got a little bit too tall. Now, often we'll see towards the end of the transplant season, you'll get a transplant like that with roots just very tightly packed. If we take this and put it right in the soil like this, especially if it's not a potting mix but regular soil, these roots have a hard time moving out into the soil. So what we want to do is be a little nasty with this and just break that up gently. And that will help those roots move out into the surrounding soil. Now this is a mint, so once it's transplanted, you could also just go ahead and clip off the top. And this will branch out very nicely then.
Well, we want to thank Rhoda for that information. And as every other week, we do receive some questions that come over email or that are called in and written down. And we received some this week from email that have some graphics with it. The first one is from Sioux Falls. The photo is of an insect that I'm unable to identify. It is one of dozens like it on the rose bush located on the south side of our house. My spouse is certain that the rose bush is being damaged by these, so I sprayed it with an insecticidal soap. Is this likely to be an effective control, if control is even necessary to protect the plant? Any thoughts, John?
Well, first of all, I want to say I think this is a great image of these. You know, some of these images come in and they're not as sharp as this, and they don't display what you want to see as well as this one does. So I want to compliment this viewer on this image. I think this is an outstanding image. Nice thing about it, it does show the insect and it shows the damage right next to it. If you look at that central vein, you can see those brown spots on that central vein. That's the sort of damage that these things are going to cause. This is actually an immature leafhopper. It's one of, I'm not sure which species, but there are a couple species in the same genus that will attack rose bushes this way and related plants. and they live their entire lives on these plants. And so this is a very young one, probably not older than first or second instar. It's just a little guy yet. And they will cause some damage to that. If the damage that you think is being caused by these is some yellowing spots that you see on the upper surface of the leaf, or these little brown spots, tiny little brown spots that you're seeing where they actually stick their mouth parts in and do that feeding, then that probably is the cause of that damage that you're seeing. If you're seeing chunks of leaf missing or other damage like that, you probably have some other insect that's doing it. Insecticidal soap is really a pretty good option on these. In a lot of cases you can remove these even with just a fairly forceful spray of water. You do want to make sure that you get the underside of the leaves as opposed to the top of the leaves, because these things are living mostly underneath there where it's protected. So same with the insecticidal soap or any other insecticide that you'd apply that way. Get it underneath there. We talked systemics a little bit ago on some of the trees. The systemic insecticide on a rosebush is a great option for these things. Works very well because they do have that piercing, sucking, feeding mechanism. And so if you can get that insecticide into the plant, they'll take it up quite easily.
And the other part to that too, you made a good point. Insecticidal soap is great, but these are on the underside, so you're not likely to get them. And unlike my comment earlier about needing 30 to 60 days to be taken up in a tree, it's much shorter for time period for the roses. And you could apply that and have it taken up fairly soon.
A few days to
a
week or so, yeah.
All right. This one comes to us from Yankton that came in via the internet. Two-part question. First one, John Ball. Am I able to move a couple of ostrich or ferns now, or do I need to wait until fall? They never spread when I plant them, but they do come up year after year.
You know, they may be a little late there. Here we could. Ideally, you transplant those before those first leaves really start to open up. And they always seem to be at least a week or so ahead of us down there. So they may already find that they're up and growing, and at that point, no, you're going to have to wait. Okay. But if they're still just coming up, just pushing through so they know, oh, there it is, you can still move it.
Okay. And if they do wait, till when?
Oh, wait till the dormant season again. Okay. You know, they tend move them during the summertime. I mean, they do like moist, cool conditions. You might damage them enough and they might fade. Yeah, an emergency move, you know, somebody's literally moving one house to the next in Yankton, yeah, you do what you have to. But if they're not in any rush and it's already pushed up through, well, now just put it on your calendar and make sure you get it the next time.
Okay. Second part to this, and this one they did send a few images. And they admit that they maybe should have been, hopefully, that these should have been a little bit clearer, but we'll see what we can do here. It's a dainty little plant that's taking over the southern half of my yard. It doesn't seem to be spreading by runners. When I pull it up, it has separate stakes and stalks. The plants themselves are about 3 inches tall, and the leaves are half a centimeter wide. It looks like it will flower soon. Tiny little flower buds on it. If you're familiar with herbs, it looks like thyme, the plant that they have. They are in shade, and as I mentioned, Yankton. So, Darrell, you have any thoughts there from the images?
Yeah, there's about 3 things going on in here. If we looked at the first picture we had there, what we're looking at there looks like it could be like a hen bed or something like that. There's the real tiny plant that they were talking about with those real shallow roots in those shaded areas. That's chickweed, and you can see that in there as well. And they've also got some wild violet in there. Now they said that was a perennial bed, correct? Mm-hmm. And there's the problem. I have nothing selectively that we can use pre-emergence or post-emergence herbicide-wise to take care of any of those in that perennial bed. The only suggestion I would have is to work into some type of a mulch, or if it's getting really out of hand, you might be looking at a renovation.
Well, I assume a perennial bed because it's over the southern half of my yard, but yet they talk about the herbs. So
okay, and the yard part, I am guessing, is probably wild violet, or if it is henbit, that could be working its way out too. And again, treatments, if they're that close to their flower bed, they're going to have to be real careful if they're going to do that. But they could use a Trimec product. But That'll do the best for now that they can use. Particularly the wild violet that's in there is going to be extremely tough, and they want to be very careful when they're doing that.
So there might be a few options if it's in a turf situation.
In a turf
flower
situation,
bed,
flower bed, no.
Yeah.
No.
Okay. This one comes from Gettysburg. This plant came up in masses in my perennial flower bed. Now this one is a perennial flower bed. It's only about 3 inches tall with heart-shaped leaves and small purple flowers. It is spreading about 3 foot. It is spreading to about 3 foot long. Can you please identify it for me?
And there's your wild violet in a perennial bed. And again, this one, if you've got it that thick in there, it is very showy and pretty. And so for a perennial bed, if that's the main thing out there, if you can keep it confined, that might be what you want to look at. But as far as control in that perennial bed, there's nothing selectively at all that I could take that out with. And even a mulch is going to be tough when it's that thick. So they may consider renovation. If that's in the yard, again, treatments, but that's one of the toughest lawn weeds we have, and it's going to take several years to get that thing.
So you say renovation, you're talking manually trying to dig that all
Yes.
up out of there and the root parts and everything? And
we're talking a total renovation of the bed.
Actually, would we be talking Roundup and just to kill all?
Even Roundup on wild violet is
Yeah,
really
you're right.
tough.
It's-
It doesn't do a really great job.
It might be best just to learn to love it.
Yeah, that's why I said it is very showy, and if you've got a good stand in there, it can keep it contained.
And if you want it to live, it'll die.
Yeah.
Casey, this comes from Brandon. They have a woodpecker that loves to chew on the trees in front of their house. 6 a.m. every morning it starts it up. What can they do to get rid of it or discourage it from doing that?
I wish I knew I could get wealthy with woodpecker problems. Woodpeckers this time of the year aren't necessarily, they're not looking for food. They don't sing in the morning, they get up and hammer on things. And so they're staking out their territory and trying to attract girls or girl woodpeckers. And so and so they're just doing what birds do. The woodpeckers, all of the birds that we have, except for just a few, are protected under international treaty, and so they are. You cannot just go shoot them. You can get in trouble for doing that. So I don't suggest doing that. Other than learning to like woodpeckers and listen. Now, sometimes if they're pounding on your home or damaging a home, there are some things you can do sometimes to scare them. People have tried, scarecrow kind of things or flashing units, or none have worked really, really well. If you have some siding they like to pound on, sometimes just cover it with metal. You're protecting the siding, although you're making the noise louder, because they like things that make a lot of noise. Boy, if they like a tree right outside your bedroom, there's not much you can do about it other than get rid of the tree right outside of your bedroom.
They tend to hit a certain spot. I mean, I've heard that putting tanglefoot, which is a sticky material, sometimes on a spot.
Yeah, sometimes if you see that they are always going to the same spot to hammer, you might try to put a piece of netting, just a piece of netting around that area to kind of keep them out. A mechanical exclusion like that might work.
So try to make the woodpecker uncomfortable in being in that tree or that area.
Exactly.
Do shiny things work? Some people have talked about taking used
old CDs,
CD discs, and put it on a string, and as it rotates,
it may work for a day or two, and then they learn quickly that there's nothing to be afraid of there.
Well, they might sleep in at least one day then.
Yeah.
So
I have them pounding on my siding at home, and so I have to deal with the same issues, but they're protected birds, and so I just learned to like them.
Okay. Not a real good answer.
Not a real good answer.
But it's the best we can do with that.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
Learn to like the woodpeckers, learn to like the violets. This is a very accepting show tonight.
Sioux Falls, John. Weeping willow. The bottom 2 feet of each whip is dead. Trimmed it in April. What could be wrong with it? The rest of the tree looks good and fine.
I hate to jump in on this accepted thing, but yeah, if they're just losing a little bit of the lower branches, the older branches, they'll sometimes do that on willows. I mean, they are somewhat of a messy tree. It sounds like most of it's fine, the top. Just trim off the dead and I was going to say accept it, but that is what willows do. So not a problem, nothing you're going to be able to spray for.
All right. From Valley Springs, John, I guess maybe either one of this one, has an asparagus patch. The plants are bending over like a shepherd's hook. What's causing it? The plants have been there for years, plenty of sun, good soil, and so on. And I noticed even a little bit of that in my asparagus plants where they're just coming up and just starting to bend over. Would that be environmental or
I believe so.
Insects? They would, asparagus beetles, would they be out causing problems like that yet?
It's a little early for asparagus beetles. We're not seeing much of any of the insects on asparagus yet. Need to really leaf out. Yeah.
Maybe the cool, wet, or more cool weather than anything, or
sounds
cool,
like
wet.
Yeah.
Okay, cool and wet. All right. Same question that we had a little bit earlier from Pierre, if that makes any difference. Wild violets taking over my lawn.
Yeah, it just in a lawn, and wild violet, like I said, it's one of the toughest lawn weeds you're going to have, and you're going to have to go with that. This time of year, you can hit it with a Trimec or something here before too long. When we start getting a lot of other foliage and stuff out, I'd want to back off. But and you can do some fall treatments. It'll take several years, and the best you can do is just kind of keep it at bay. It's a really tough one. If you can get the Trimec product that's got triclopyr in it, and if you do get that one, make sure you stay away from the root zone of trees as much as you can. The trouble with that is it's going to be fairly close to being under trees. So just be careful, but that's one of the things we can use on it.
Okay. Warner, South Dakota, Casey. Bird they cannot identify. Red to reddish orange body. Olive wings, I think is what it says here. Midway on the belly to the back of the tail is also olive, not quite as big as a robin. Observed it in the treetops, upper parts of the trees, eating insects. Seen twice in the last 3 days. He's a new one and can't really find or figure out what it is.
I think I know what you've got. I saw one in my Curry garden yesterday. Find your bird book and look up summer tanager. There's been several tanagers seen in the state this year, both scarlet tanagers here in Brookings and summer tanagers in Madison and elsewhere. Well, one here in Brookings yesterday. And so that would be, that's where I would look. The first year males start to get a little bit of orange on the head, and then the rest of the body's kind of a yellowish green or olive color. And by the time they're 2, then they get the full red, redder than a cardinal red. So that's where I would look. Summer tanager.
John Ball, Belfouche. When should I prune water sprouts?
It's coming up. Usually want to do that a few weeks after full leaf out. And if you prune it then, they'll come back much less vigorous. So probably, the way things look out there, maybe about 2 weeks from now.
2 weeks from now?
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything you spray on for that?
There's sucker stopper, which you can buy at garden centers and that, and spray that on the cut. But other than that, no. Don't use pruning paint. Don't use any other material. Sucker stopper, if you want to spray it on, that's fine. Otherwise, just cut it, and you'll probably not get a lot of sprouts coming back.
Okay. And this one comes to us from Alcester. There we go. Ash trees, John again, Ball. 5-year-old, 2 years ago the limb started to die. This year's quite a bit of it is dead. They sprayed for a disease, didn't seem to help. Should we just leave it? Will it recover? Or should they replace it?
Well, I wonder what kind of ash tree they have. And the reason I wonder that is we've seen a lot of die-off of black ash cultivars. Okay. In fact, I think Sioux Falls is a good example. Last year you lost most of them, and we lost a number up here too. So a relatively young tree, it may be one of the black ashes that was planted. If that's the case, you're going to find some cankers along the trunk too. I noticed that in a number of black ash in town here yesterday. And you're better off just removing it. And quite frankly, considering the longevity of ash, considering sooner or later emerald ash borer will arrive in the state. If it's not doing well, I'd just remove it and plant something that's has fewer problems or potential problems than that.
Now you mentioned the word canker.
Yeah.
What's that?
Well, what that is you'll find a localized canker, a shrunken area of the trunk where the bark is literally pulled away and it's kind of shrunken in, and that's usually due to fungi. And quite often we have these perennial cankers. They just continue to expand every year, but the first thing is you'll find the bark is just shrunken away in a small area of the bark, and now at this time of year, as the tree is beginning to expand, that bark just starts breaking away.
Okay, and that's dead tissue, and so it stops the flow. Okay.
Yep. And we're seeing a lot on that on black ash. I mean, there's almost no reason to plant any black ash anymore, regardless of emerald ash borer.
And we don't know what. Maybe.
No, it's one of those mysterious things. Quite frankly, is nobody's really looked at it, and frankly, I don't think anyone's going to spend a lot of time on it, considering we're probably not going to have black ash. You know, where they live. A tree that I'd recommend if they want to go with some speed would be like an accolade elm. You know, that's got wheels. It'll grow pretty fast. They're 3 to 5 foot a year.
All right, John Keycafer, we got one for you here from Madison. How do you get rid of ant mounds? He has about an acre and has had a problem for several years.
Well, I guess I get to go with the learn to like them theory here, too. Really, and I'm not going to get up on the soapbox too long here, but ants really are a beneficial insect. They're predatory. They're going to kill off a lot of other things. In the event that you've got mounds in particular in a place that you can't deal with them, you got to get rid of them. Probably the best way to go about this is, first of all, try to figure out what kind of ant you have. Certain ants will take things a little bit differently, but the old standby here, and I've got a few images on this one. This came in as a web question as well. This is an ant mound. This is up close to a house. This is a place where you might not want to have a decent sized ant mound going. And so if you've got that happening, first thing you need to do is go out and rake over it. Just lightly, just kind of disturb that soil, flatten it out a little bit, and you know, this is small hand rake. You can use any size that you want. Just rake over that and get that top off of there. Typically then you want to apply a dust type insecticide, and I'm not going to advocate one brand over another. There are several different active ingredients available. All of them will work reasonably well on these. The trick is you're going to spread that on that ant mound and then lightly rake it in. So that you don't want to mix it completely with the soil, but you do want to mix it in with the soil a little bit. And generally the best thing to do then is go over it and water it very lightly. You don't want to have runoff coming off of there. You don't want to have so much water that the water is running away from that area, but you want it to mix in with that soil pretty well. Even with this sort of treatment, it's probably going to take 2 or 3 times of that per mound to get rid of them. You know, if you don't want to use the chemicals, you can simply rake them off and water them frequently every few days, and you may discourage some of the ants. Chances are, though, they'll just keep coming back and building those mounds. So if you can live with them, you know, they are a good thing to have around. Otherwise, that's the method that's probably going to work best for getting rid of them. There are liquid insecticides that are available as well, and if you've got really big mounds, you may need to go with one of those drenches that's designed for that. But for most of these smaller ones, a dust type formulation will work best.
I'm glad you covered the mound aspect, because we also had a viewer that called in, or actually emailed in from Watertown. Same question. And
right.
It sounds like he's been trying a lot of different things to take care of those ant mounds. But
well, and that's how we managed to come up with those images that quickly. We knew that question was in and prepared them for that sort of thing.
Right. Good. Daryl, Alcester as well. They have sweet corn planted. What chemical can be used to put down around the sweet corn to keep the grass from growing up around it in the garden plot?
If you've got a garden situation, a small garden, you're going to be really limited as far as what you can put out there. One of the things you can look at that'll work would be like a preen type of product, but then you're going to have to go into a rotational program, and most gardens are too small to have rotation that you're going to eliminate a bunch of your other crops the following year. So if you've got a smaller garden, I guess I wouldn't use herbicide product at all. I would use more of the mechanical means, pulling, tilling, that type of thing, a good mulch, and go with that.
So keep the elbow grease going and keep it black, and,
yeah.
and put mulch around the plants. That's
Yeah.
good for the plants as well.
I would go that route. It's going to be a lot safer deal for the whole garden. It's going to save you a lot of record keeping as far as which plants are what into the garden.
Right. Very good. So thank you. Well, that's all the time we have this evening. Just to let you know, Garden Line does repeat twice each week on South Dakota Public Broadcasting Digital Channel 3, also known as the Create Channel. The encore broadcast can be seen Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central and Saturdays at 4 p.m. Central. Check your local listings to find SDPB Digital Channel 3 where you live. Now time to wrap it up, and thanks to our panel of experts, John Keykafer, Brookings County Extension Educator, John Ball, Extension Forester Specialist, Daryl Denicky, Extension Integrated Pest Management, and K.C. Jensen, SDSU Wildlife and Fishery Sciences. Thanks to our phone volunteers, the folks from Minnehaha County Master Gardeners, and thanks to you for watching and calling in. On behalf of the entire crew, have a good evening and happy gardening.
Funding for Garden Line is provided in part by your membership in the Friends of South Dakota Public Broadcasting. And by Swiftel Communications.